Hello, everyone. This is Yoko. In this channel, I feel that a lot of information about what's happening in China isn't accurately reaching countries outside of China. Therefore, I've taken it upon myself to gather information from various sources and share it in English. Since my native language isn't English, I'm using an AI speaker to generate the audio to ensure I convey information accurately. If you enjoy the content, please consider subscribing to the channel and showing your support. Today, I'd like to talk about the establishment of People's Armed Forces in various parts of China. Let's begin by explaining what the People's Armed Forces are. In simple terms, they are a type of militia. These individuals are not full-time soldiers, they have other jobs in their daily lives. However, they receive military training and are equipped with weapons. When given orders by the military, they engage in military operations. These organizations have a history in China and have existed for quite some time. In certain periods of China's history, there was a shortage of funds to maintain the military. As I may have mentioned earlier, during the era of Deng Xiaoping, the military didn't have sufficient financial resources, so they engaged in business activities to earn their own salaries. This is considered one of the reasons for economic corruption within the Chinese military. Since the military started engaging in business, military personnel transitioned from being purely soldiers to becoming businessmen. Moreover, unlike civilian business people, they held various powers, which led to not only business activities but also activities like smuggling and illegal trade of military equipment. Eventually, commercial activities were banned, but the relationships and connections formed during the business era, including those with the black market, continued to exist. So, the Chinese military became quite a black market organization. Leaving that aside, in the past, there were times when China didn't have enough funds to maintain its military. During such times, there was a question of how to deal with high security risks. The term high security risks means that the Communist Party was concerned about it. For example, when there was a need to protect critical factories, it wasn't feasible to station the military or even police units permanently. To address this issue, the People's Armed Forces, known as the militia, were established. For instance, if there was a need to establish People's Armed Forces for a particular factory, the factory employees would be incorporated into the militia. These organizations were led by military officers who provided military training. These militias were also mobilized during events like the Tiananmen Square incident. It is estimated that around 100,000 people participated in the protests during the Tiananmen Square incident, while the conventional security forces tasked with suppressing the protests numbered around 10,000. The Beijing Public Security Department had about 3,000 personnel, and the rest were military units. Mobilizing just 10,000 to suppress 100,000 protesters might seem inadequate. At that time, it is said that another 10,000 people were armed. Although the term armed did not necessarily mean firearms, they likely had other weapons. These 10,000 people who were armed were said to be members of the militia organizations organized in factories in Beijing. So, besides the conventional security forces, China had organizations that would only act on military orders during emergencies. However, as the Communist Party's control over China solidified, the risk of organizations opposing the party and causing unrest decreased. The Communist Party probably believed this. Please let me know if you have any comments on the content of this video, as I gather information from multiple sources. And as always, if you find this content interesting or informative, I'd appreciate it if you could subscribe to the channel and show your support. Thank you for your attention. Therefore, in addition to the regular security forces, there existed organizations that would only follow military orders in emergencies. However, as the Communist Party's control over China strengthened, the risk of organizations opposing the party and causing unrest decreased. The Communist Party probably believed this. Military training is conducted in Chinese universities. Currently, the security situation in China is deteriorating, and it's predicted to get worse in the future. As the economic situation worsens, dissatisfaction tends to rise. When people have nothing to lose, they become a significant risk. It's scary when a large number of people who can't make a living emerge. Up until now, People had some form of stable employment and were hesitant to confront the government because they might lose their jobs. There was also some discontent with the government, but as long as people could make a living, they were reluctant to risk disrupting their current lives. However, when unemployment increases, and people can no longer make ends meet, they may consider overthrowing the Communist Party. While I can't say for sure whether they would go that far, there is a significant possibility of violent protests against organizations that directly disrupt people's lives. The potential targets of such protests include the real estate sector, particularly issues related to property possession, and institutions involved in raising money. In China, local governments raise funds from the general public for real estate development and infrastructure projects. These projects are carried out by special entities known as financing platforms, which are essentially local government subsidiaries. Local governments can't borrow money directly due to regulations, so they create these special entities to raise funds, and these entities collect money from the public. However, the high likelihood of being unable to repay this money is a significant concern in China. This issue is considered more dangerous than the real estate sector's debt problems. For now, China has managed to avoid large-scale defaults by taking on new debts to repay old ones, but this isn't a sustainable solution. These government subsidiaries have accumulated debt over time, and at some point, they won't be able to repay it anymore. China has a vast number of these entities, and it's impossible to bail them all out. Therefore, when the point comes that they can't repay the money, there's a risk that crowds will protest against these government subsidiaries, demanding the return of their money. In fact, in China, there have been instances where crowds gathered when banks refused to return deposits. So, if large-scale defaults were to occur, it would directly affect the security situation. This brings us to the topic of the People's Armed Forces this time. This year, these government subsidiaries, known as special entities, have been organizing People's Armed Forces in various parts of China, including Shanghai, which is the economic center of China. This suggests that China's economic situation is possibly more dire than we may think. Now, let's delve into more specific details. In Shanghai, there is an entity known as Shanghai Shenzhen Group. This Shenzhen refers to those financing platforms I mentioned earlier. So, this is essentially a government subsidiary responsible for infrastructure development, road construction, tunnel construction, and even the development of the subway network. In other words, local governments in China establish these entities to raise funds and conduct infrastructure projects. While these entities collect funds, they aren't considered government debt on the surface, and it appears as if these are self-standing entities. However, there's a common understanding that local governments stand behind these entities. For instance, in the case of Shanghai Shenzhen Group, it's widely believed that the Shanghai government is the one ultimately backing it, so people are willing to lend money to it. In the case of Shanghai, it's considered a region with a reasonable amount of money circulating, so the likelihood of a default is relatively low. Even if government subsidiaries can't repay their debts, the probability of it happening in Shanghai is believed to be very low. However, despite this, Shanghai Shenzhen Group has organized People's Armed Forces, which has garnered attention. They held an inaugural meeting when forming the organization, and among the 7 executives who appeared on stage, 4 were military personnel, while 3 were executives of this organization. So, while the People's Armed Forces are comprised of employees of the Shanghai Shenzhen Group, the organization is actually led by the military. Furthermore, this movement is not limited to Shanghai but has also been organized in other regions like Guangdong Province and Wuhan. In this year alone, 23 People's Armed Forces have been established. As mentioned earlier, the People's Armed Forces were not organized for foreign warfare but were created to maintain domestic security. They were originally established as a precaution against internal dissidents or forces opposing the Communist Party. However, in present-day China, the economic hardship faced by the people can lead to attacks on these government subsidiary organizations for various reasons, such as political ones, looting, or rioting. Thus, the deterioration of domestic security in China is expected, and this is why these organizations are being established. Another perspective on this situation is that these organizations may not be solely for maintaining security. In the past, there was a concept called the Cultural Revolution in China. It was a way of rallying the people's power to resolve political issues, effectively eliminating opposition forces within the Communist Party. They could brand anyone, even a street vendor, as a capitalist and crush them. The true aim, from the Communist Party's perspective, was to eliminate individuals who posed a threat to them. While this is a hypothesis, some people argue that such movements aim to rile up the masses and bring about a second cultural revolution in China. These groups are created with the idea that they would need people who understand how to use weapons and conduct warfare to facilitate such a movement. In any case, the security situation within China is expected to deteriorate in the future. As a side note, the images from China that we often see in Japan portray a peaceful atmosphere. However, these images represent only one aspect of China. When you travel to the provinces, you may find that the security situation can be quite challenging. Incidents like a woman in a local eatery being harassed, and when she refused, she was severely beaten, leading to her potential disappearance or death. Such occurrences are not uncommon in China's provinces, and the police often turn a blind eye or do not take action to avoid getting into trouble themselves. Some areas in China, particularly in the less developed regions, operate on their rules and disregard laws and regulations. While this may not be widely known, the possibility of China as a whole turning into a place where regional authorities exert their power and dismiss rules and laws is increasingly likely. That concludes our discussion for this time, and I'll see you in the next video.